Juliet Keating stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of her grandmother's brick apartment building, staring up at the water stains spreading across the facade like dark continents on an old map, and wondered if the billionaire who owned it even knew her grandmother's ceiling had collapsed last Tuesday. She had spent 3 days trying to reach someone, anyone, at Zenith Properties through their corporate hotline. Each time, she got transferred to another department, left another voicemail, sent another email into the void. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had been sleeping on Juliet's couch for a week now, her arthritis getting worse every night on the 2 soft cushions. The building superintendent had stopped answering calls entirely. The other tenants were elderly, most on fixed incomes, and none of them had the energy to fight a faceless corporation. So Juliet had done something old-fashioned. She had written a letter, not an email, not a text. A real letter on cream-colored stationery, carefully worded but honest, explaining the conditions of the building at 428 Maple Street. The peeling paint, the loose railings, the heating system that worked when it felt like it, the roof that leaked in 3 apartments now, not just her grandmother's. She had included photographs, building code violations, and a polite but firm request that someone address these issues before winter set in hard. She had addressed it to Sebastian Xavier, the CEO of Zenith Properties, at his corporate headquarters downtown. She had no expectation that he would ever see it. Men like that had assistants and assistants to their assistants. But at least she had tried everything. That had been 4 days ago. Juliet unlocked the door to her own apartment across town, a modest 1-bedroom in a much newer building, and immediately started making dinner. Her grandmother would be back soon from her afternoon walk, the only exercise Eleanor insisted on maintaining despite everything. Juliet was browning chicken in a pan when her phone rang, a known number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello, is this Juliet Keating?" The voice was male, deep, professional. "Yes, who's calling? My name is Sebastian Xavier. I received your letter about the property on Maple Street." Juliet nearly dropped her phone into the chicken. "I'm sorry, what?" "The letter you sent to my office, about 428 Maple Street. I'd like to discuss it with you if you have time." Her mind raced. This had to be a joke. Or maybe an assistant pretending to be him. "Mr. Xavier, I appreciate the call, but I'm actually in my car right now, about 10 minutes from the property. I was hoping we could meet there, take a look at the issues you mentioned." Juliet looked down at herself. She was wearing old jeans and a sweater with a small hole in the sleeve. Her hair was in a messy bun. "Right now, if that works for you. I understand it's short notice." Something in his voice sounded genuine. Tired, maybe, but genuine. "Okay, yes, I can be there in 20 minutes. I'll see you then." The line went dead. Juliet stood frozen for a moment, then scrambled to turn off the stove. She texted her grandmother that she had to run out, changed into better jeans and a clean sweater, and was out the door in 5 minutes. Traffic was mercifully light. She pulled up to 428 Maple Street with 2 minutes to spare and saw a black sedan already parked in front. Not a limousine, not some ostentatious luxury car, just a nice sedan. As she got out of her car, the driver's door of the sedan opened. The man who stepped out was not what she expected. Sebastian Xavier was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he had been running his hands through it all day. He wore an expensive suit but had loosened his tie, and there was something about the way he moved, direct and purposeful, that suggested he actually did things rather than just directing other people to do them. He looked to be in his early 30s, maybe 33 or 34, with strong features and dark eyes that immediately found hers. "Miss Keating, that's me." She walked over, extending her hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice." He looked up at the building, his jaw tightening. Even from the street, the water damage was visible. "How long has it been like this, the water damage?" "That's recent, last few weeks. But the building has been deteriorating for over a year." He nodded slowly, still looking up. "I'm going to be honest with you. I had no idea. This property is part of a portfolio my company acquired 2 years ago, one of about 40 buildings. I have property managers who are supposed to handle maintenance and tenant concerns." His voice had gone hard. "Clearly, that hasn't been happening." "Your property manager doesn't return calls. I'm aware of that now." He looked at her. "Can we go inside? I'd like to see what you documented in your letter." Juliet led him into the building. The lobby was dim, one of the light fixtures broken. The tile floor was cracked in places. Sebastian said nothing, but she saw him taking mental notes of everything. They took the stairs since the elevator had been unreliable for months. On the 3rd floor, she showed him the worst of it. Mrs. Chen's apartment, where the bathroom ceiling had a hole you could see pipes through. Mr. Patterson's place, where the windows were so drafty he had to use towels to block the cold air. And finally, her grandmother's apartment, where the bedroom ceiling had collapsed entirely, plaster and insulation still scattered across the covered furniture. Sebastian walked through each space carefully, asking questions, taking photos on his phone. His expression grew darker with each apartment. "This is unacceptable," he said finally, standing in the ruins of Eleanor's bedroom. "This is completely unacceptable. I'm glad you agree." He turned to her. "Your grandmother lives here," she did. "She's staying with me now, has been for a week. I'm sorry." He meant it. She could hear it in his voice. "I'm going to fix this, all of it. I'm going to have my personal assistant contact every tenant tomorrow to arrange temporary housing if needed while we do emergency repairs. The property manager is fired, effective immediately, and I'm going to personally oversee getting this building up to code." Juliet felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying for days. "Thank you. Don't thank me. This should never have happened in the first place." He looked around the apartment again. "These are people's homes." They walked back downstairs together. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. Sebastian leaned against his car, and for the first time since she had met him 20 minutes ago, he looked uncertain. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "Why did you write a letter?" "Why not just call the city, report the violations?" Juliet considered the question. "I did call the city. Filed a complaint last week. But that process takes time, and my grandmother doesn't have time. I thought maybe if I went straight to the top, even if it was a long shot, someone might actually listen." "I'm glad you did." He paused. "Most people would have just sued." "I don't want to sue. I just want my grandmother to have a safe place to live." Something shifted in his expression, a kind of respect. "What do you do, Miss Keating? For work, I'm a graphic designer, freelance, mostly corporate branding." "Do you like it?" The question surprised her. "Most days it pays the bills. Why? Just curious." He straightened up from the car. "I should let you get back to your evening. I've taken up enough of your time." "Wait," Juliet said, the word coming out before she could think about it. She checked her watch. It was almost 7. "Have you eaten dinner?" He blinked. "What dinner? Have you eaten?" She felt suddenly bold, maybe because he had actually shown up, actually listened, actually seemed to care. "I was in the middle of making chicken when you called. There's plenty. My grandmother will be there. It's the least I can do to say thank you." Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to do that. I know, I'm offering." A small smile tugged at his mouth, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. "Then I'd like that, thank you." He followed her car across town to her apartment. Juliet texted her grandmother on the way, a quick warning that she was bringing a guest. Eleanor's response was a string of question marks, which was fair. Her apartment was small but neat, decorated with prints she had designed herself and plants on every available surface. Eleanor was sitting on the couch when they walked in, her silver hair in a neat bun, wearing her favorite cardigan. She looked from Juliet to Sebastian with raised eyebrows. "Grandma, this is Sebastian Xavier. He owns the building on Maple Street." "Mr. Xavier, this is my grandmother, Eleanor Keating." Eleanor stood, moving slowly because of her arthritis. Sebastian crossed the room and gently shook her hand. "Mrs. Keating, it's a pleasure. I want to apologize personally for the condition of your apartment. It's inexcusable, and I'm going to make it right." Eleanor studied him with the sharp eyes of someone who had lived through 8 decades and knew how to read people. "You came yourself, didn't send someone else?" "Yes, madam. That's something." She nodded slowly. "Well, you're staying for dinner, I hope, if it's not an imposition." "Oh, it's an imposition," Eleanor said, but she was smiling. "But you're staying anyway. Juliet, put him to work. If he's going to eat my granddaughter's cooking, he can help make it." Sebastian actually laughed, a genuine sound that made Juliet smile despite herself. "Yes, madam." In the kitchen, which was barely big enough for 2 people to work comfortably, Juliet put Sebastian on salad duty while she finished the chicken and started rice. He took off his suit jacket, hung it over a chair, and rolled up his sleeves. His forearms were strong, tanned. "I have to admit," he said, chopping lettuce with more competence than she expected, "this is the most unusual business meeting I've ever had." "Is that what this is? A business meeting?" "I'm not sure what else to call it." "Dinner," Juliet said. "It's called dinner." He smiled again, that same transformation. "Fair enough." They talked while they cooked. She learned that he had started Zenith Properties 7 years ago, beginning with a single apartment building he had renovated himself, working nights and weekends while holding down another job. He had studied architecture in college, but found he was better at the business side of real estate. The company had grown faster than he had anticipated, and somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the day-to-day reality of the properties he owned. "That's not an excuse," he said, transferring the salad to a bowl. "I should have better systems in place. Should have been paying more attention." "You're here now," Juliet said. "That counts for something." Eleanor insisted on setting the table, waving off Juliet's attempts to help. They sat down to eat, and Sebastian complimented the food so genuinely that Juliet felt herself blushing. The conversation flowed easily. Eleanor told stories about the neighborhood, how it had changed over the years. Sebastian listened intently, asking questions, genuinely interested. "You remind me of my late husband," Eleanor said at one point, studying Sebastian. "He was a builder. Always cared about the work, about doing things right." "That's a high compliment," Sebastian said. "Thank you." After dinner, Sebastian insisted on helping with dishes. Eleanor retreated to the couch, and Juliet found herself standing next to him at the sink, him washing and her drying in a kind of domestic intimacy that felt both strange and comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Why did you really come yourself?" "You could have sent someone. Your head of maintenance, a property manager, anyone." He was quiet for a moment, his hand still in the soapy water. "Your letter was different. Most complaints I see, by the time they reach my desk, they've been filtered through legal, sanitized. Yours was personal. You cared. And you were right. I started this company because I wanted to create quality housing, places where people would want to live. Somewhere along the way, I got too far removed from that mission." He looked at her. "I needed to see it for myself. To remember why I started this in the first place." Juliet felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. That's a good answer. It's the truth. They finished the dishes. It was almost 9 o'clock. Sebastian should leave, Juliet knew that, but she found herself not wanting him to. Eleanor had fallen asleep on the couch, her head tilted back, soft snores escaping. I should go, Sebastian said softly, looking at Eleanor. Let you get her to bed. Yeah. Juliet walked him to the door. Thank you for coming, for listening. Thank you for the letter and for dinner. He paused, one hand on the doorknob. Can I call you tomorrow to update you on the repairs? I'd like that. And maybe, he said, and now he looked uncertain again, vulnerable in a way she wouldn't have expected from a billionaire CEO. If you're free, we could have dinner again. Just the two of us, Juliet's breath caught. Are you asking me on a date? Yes, I am, she should say no. This was complicated, messy. He was her grandmother's landlord, a billionaire completely out of her league, but when she looked at him, she didn't see any of that. She saw a man who had dropped everything to drive across the city because an elderly woman's ceiling had collapsed, who had stood in her tiny kitchen chopping lettuce and smiling, who looked at her now like her answer actually mattered. Yes, she said, I'd like that. His smile was worth everything. Friday, he left, and Juliet leaned against the closed door, her heart racing. Eleanor's voice came from the couch, no longer sleepy. That's a good man, Jules. You were awake. I'm old, not dead. He likes you. Grandma, and you like him. I saw the way you looked at each other. Eleanor sat up, fixing Juliet with that knowing gaze. Don't overthink it. Some things are just right. Juliet helped her grandmother to bed, trying not to think about Sebastian's smile, the warmth of his hand when they had shaken hello, the way he had fit so naturally into her kitchen. She failed completely. The next day, true to his word, Sebastian called at 10 in the morning. I have a crew at the building right now doing assessment, he said. Emergency repairs start tomorrow. I've arranged for hotel rooms for any tenant who needs one, all expenses paid for as long as it takes. That's wonderful. I wanted to ask your grandmother personally if she'd like to return once her apartment is repaired, or if she'd prefer I help her relocate to another property. One that I'll personally guarantee is maintained properly. Juliet felt warmth spread through her chest. I'll ask her. Sebastian. Yes. Thank you, really. Stop thanking me, he said, but his voice was warm. I'm still looking forward to Friday. Me too. The week passed in a blur. Sebastian texted her updates on the building, photos of the work in progress. The messages were professional at first, but gradually became more personal. Questions about her day. Stories about problems at other properties he was now investigating personally. A photo of a coffee cup with truly terrible latte art that made her laugh. She found herself thinking about him constantly. The way he had looked at her grandmother's ruined apartment with genuine anger. How he had moved in her kitchen with easy competence. The warmth in his eyes when he had asked her to dinner. Friday arrived. Sebastian picked her up at 7, and this time he was driving himself, no corporate sedan. He wore dark jeans and a button-down shirt, more casual than the suit but still put together. He held the car door for her, old-fashioned in a way that made her smile. Where are we going? She asked. A place I think you'll like. Trust me. Against my better judgment, yes. He took her to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a neighborhood she didn't know well. It was family-owned, warm and intimate with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. The owner greeted Sebastian by name, seated them at a corner table. You come here often? Juliet asked. It's my favorite place in the city. Family recipes, everything made fresh. The owner, Antonio, his grandfather, started this place 60 years ago. He smiled. It reminds me why I love this city. The history, the people who build things to last. They ordered wine, and then food that turned out to be spectacular. The conversation flowed even more easily than it had at her apartment. She told him about her work, her dreams of maybe opening her own design studio someday. He told her about growing up in a working-class neighborhood, watching his parents struggle with landlords who didn't care, how that had shaped everything he wanted to do with his company. "I never wanted to be that kind of landlord," he said. "Someone who sees properties as just numbers on a spreadsheet, but I let that happen. Your letter was a wake-up call." "So I did you a favor," Juliet teased. "You did." He reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused in a way she hadn't expected. "A bigger one than you know." The touch sent electricity up her arm. She turned her hand, lacing her fingers with his. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something most people don't know about you," he thought about it. "I'm terrified I'm going to fail, that the company will grow too big, become the kind of corporation I never wanted to build, that I'll lose sight of why I started. That won't happen." "How do you know?" "Because you're terrified of it. People who don't care don't worry about that." She squeezed his hand. "Your turn, ask me something." "What do you want? 5 years from now, what does your life look like?" No one had asked her that in a long time. "Stability," she said slowly. "My own studio. Maybe a house, something with a yard, a garden. I want to take care of my grandmother without it being a constant struggle. I want to wake up and feel like I'm building something that lasts." "That's beautiful. It's simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy, and it doesn't mean less valuable." He was still holding her hand. "I think you'll get all of that." "Yeah. Yeah." They stayed at the restaurant until closing, talking until Antonio finally came over, apologizing but explaining they needed to lock up. Sebastian left what Juliet suspected was a very generous tip. Outside, the night air was cool, autumn settling in properly. "I don't want this to end," Sebastian said. "Then don't let it." He kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, his hand cupping her face. Then she leaned into him and it deepened, became something more urgent, full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling for you," he said. "I know it's fast, but I am." "Me too." She kissed him again, brief and sweet. "Me too." He drove her home, walked her to her door. "Can I see you tomorrow? I work tomorrow." "But Sunday, I'll call you." Another kiss, and then he was gone, and Juliet was floating into her apartment where Eleanor was still awake, reading in the living room. "Good date?" her grandmother asked, not looking up from her book. "Really good." "Good. He called me today, you know." Juliet stopped. "What?" Sebastian asked if I wanted to tour some of his other properties, find a new place. "We're going Monday." Eleanor finally looked up, her eyes twinkling. "He's a keeper, Jules." "It's been one date, Grandma. Some things you just know." The next few weeks passed in a golden haze. Sebastian and Juliet fell into an easy rhythm, seeing each other whenever their schedules allowed. Sometimes it was dinner, sometimes just coffee between his meetings. Once, he showed up at her apartment at 10 at night with takeout after a particularly brutal day, and they ate sitting on her floor, her head eventually ending up on his shoulder. He was different than she had expected a billionaire to be. He worked constantly, yes, but he was hands-on, engaged. He showed her photos of the progress on Maple Street, introduced her to his new head of property management, a woman named Sarah who actually seemed to care. He took her grandmother apartment hunting and listened seriously to Eleanor's opinions. But more than that, he listened to Juliet. He asked about her work, looked at her designs with genuine interest, made suggestions that were actually helpful. He remembered details, like how she took her coffee and that she hated mushrooms. He showed up. A month after their first date, he took her to see 428 Maple Street. The building was transformed. New roof, new windows, fresh paint. The lobby gleamed. Eleanor's apartment had been completely restored, better than it had ever been. "What do you think?" Sebastian asked, watching her face. "It's incredible. You really did it. We did it. Your letter started this." He took her hand. "I've been going through all my properties now, personally inspecting them. We've already started repairs on 6 other buildings. I'm restructuring my entire company, focusing on quality over quantity." "Sebastian, that's amazing. Come work with me." She turned to him. "What?" "I need someone to help me rebrand the company. New logo, new website, new message. Someone who understands what I'm trying to build. Someone I trust." He pulled her closer. "I want it to be you. That's crazy." "Why? You're a graphic designer, a good one. I've seen your portfolio." "You looked at my portfolio?" "Of course I did." He smiled. "So, will you consider it?" She should think about it, be practical, consider all the implications of mixing business with their relationship. But when she looked at him, she saw possibility, trust, partnership. "Yes," she said. "Yes." He kissed her there in her grandmother's restored apartment, and it felt like a beginning. The work was challenging but exhilarating. Juliet threw herself into Rebranding Zenith properties, working closely with Sebastian to define what the company stood for. She designed a new logo, clean and modern but with warmth. She rewrote their website copy, interviewed tenants, created materials that showcased real people in real homes. Sebastian was the best client she had ever had. He trusted her vision but challenged her when something didn't feel right. They worked late nights in his office, ordering dinner and spreading design mock-ups across his conference table. He was brilliant at his work, she discovered, seeing angles and possibilities she wouldn't have considered. But the best part was that they were building something together. 3 months into their relationship, Sebastian invited her to his house for the first time. She had expected something ostentatious, a mansion full of expensive art and cold marble. Instead, it was a renovated brownstone in an older neighborhood, warm and lived in, full of books and comfortable furniture. "This is not what I expected," she said, looking around. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something more billionaire-ish," he laughed. "I bought this place because I loved the bones of it. Spent 2 years renovating it myself as much as I could. It's home." He made her dinner, actually cooked, and they ate on his back patio overlooking a small garden. After, they sat on his couch, her legs draped over his lap, and talked about everything and nothing. At some point, talking turned to kissing, and then he was carrying her to his bedroom, and she went willingly. Making love with Sebastian was different than anything she had experienced before. He was attentive, focused entirely on her, learning what she liked with a patience that undid her. After, lying tangled together in his sheets, she felt something slot into place in her chest. "I love you," she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. He went very still. Then he turned her to face him, his eyes serious. "Say that again. I love you." "I love you too." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "God, Juliet, I love you so much." She stayed the night and the next night, and soon she was spending more time at his place than her own. Eleanor moved back into her restored apartment and immediately started matchmaking more aggressively, inviting them over for dinner and making pointed comments about great-grandchildren. 6 months in, Sebastian asked Juliet to move in with him officially. She said yes without hesitation. They turned one of his spare rooms into a home office for her, with perfect lighting and space for all her plants. She learned his routines and he learned hers. They cooked together, worked together, built a life together. A year after she had written that letter, Sebastian took her back to the Italian restaurant where they had their first date. Antonio greeted them warmly, showed them to the same corner table. They ordered wine and reminisced about that first evening. "I was so nervous," Sebastian admitted. "I wanted to impress you so badly." "You did. You do." She reached across the table for his hand, the gesture now familiar and essential. "Every day, Juliet." He stood up and her heart started racing because she knew, somehow she knew. He came around the table, knelt down on one knee and pulled a small box from his pocket. "A year ago, you wrote me a letter that changed my life. You reminded me what I was working for, what actually matters. You've made me better at my work, better as a person. You've given me a home that's more than just a building." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" She was crying, nodding before she could even speak. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her as the whole restaurant burst into applause. Antonio was dabbing at his eyes with a napkin. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Sebastian's garden. Eleanor was there, beaming, along with a small gathering of friends and family. Juliet wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers. Sebastian cried when he saw her walking toward him, didn't even try to hide it. Their vows were personal, heartfelt. She promised to always write him letters when words were hard to say. He promised to always show up, no matter what. They promised to build a life together that would last. The reception was at that Italian restaurant, Antonio insisting on catering it personally. They danced to old standards, fed each other cake, laughed until their faces hurt. Eleanor cornered Sebastian at one point, and Juliet watched her grandmother take his hands and say something that made him hug her tight. Later, when Juliet asked what Eleanor had said, Sebastian just smiled. "She told me to take care of you, and that if I didn't, she'd haunt me from the afterlife." That sounds like her. "I told her I planned on spending every day for the rest of my life taking care of you, so she should rest easy." They honeymooned in Italy, eating their way through small towns and touring old buildings. Sebastian photographed architecture while Juliet sketched designs inspired by the colors and textures around them. They talked about the future, about the family they wanted to build. When they returned, Juliet expanded her role at Zenith Properties, working not just on branding but on tenant relations, creating programs to involve residents in building improvements. Sebastian made her a partner in the company, not just an employee. They were equals, building something bigger than either of them alone. 2 years after their wedding, Juliet found out she was pregnant. She told Sebastian over breakfast, just handed him the positive test, and watched his face transform from confusion to understanding to pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. Their daughter was born on a rainy Tuesday in April. They named her Rose Eleanor Xavier, after Sebastian's late mother and Juliet's grandmother. She had Sebastian's dark hair and Juliet's green eyes and a cry that could wake the dead. Holding her for the first time, Sebastian looked at Juliet with such overwhelming love that she felt like her heart might burst. "We made a person," he said, awed. "We did. She's perfect. She really is." Eleanor, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, proclaimed herself the greatest grandmother who ever lived and promptly began spoiling Rose with reckless abandon. She moved into the brownstone's guest suite, helping with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, and giving Juliet and Sebastian moments to remember they were still a couple, not just parents. Life settled into a new rhythm. Juliet worked from home more, designing while Rose napped, taking meetings with the baby on her hip. Sebastian left work earlier, unwilling to miss bedtime. They were tired constantly, overwhelmed frequently but deeply, profoundly happy. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, they stood in the garden where they had gotten married, Rose toddling between them on unsteady legs. The garden had grown, lush and full, a living thing they had nurtured together. "You remember when you showed up at the building that first day?" Juliet asked. How could I forget? I was terrified you were going to tell me to go to hell. I considered it. She smiled, watching Rose investigate a flower. I never imagined this, any of this. Me neither. He pulled her close, Rose between them, his small family. Best letter I ever received. Best decision I ever made. They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Juliet thought about that day standing outside her grandmother's building, desperate and determined. She had written a letter hoping for repairs, for basic human decency. She had found so much more. She had found a partner who showed up, who listened, who cared about building things that lasted. She had found a love that was both comfortable and exciting, grounded in mutual respect and shared dreams. She had found home. Rose squealed and pointed at a butterfly. Sebastian scooped her up, held her high so she could try to touch it. Juliet watched them, her heart so full it ached. Some stories began with grand gestures or dramatic moments. Theirs had started with a letter and a ceiling collapse and a billionaire who actually cared enough to show up. And from that simple beginning, they had built something beautiful, a life, a family, a love that would last. 5 years after that first dinner at Juliet's apartment, Zenith Properties was a different company. Sebastian had sold off half his portfolio, focusing on smaller-scale projects where he could maintain quality. He had implemented tenant advisory boards, profit-sharing programs, sustainable building practices. The company won awards not for size but for innovation and ethics. Juliet ran her own design studio now, working on projects she cared about with clients she respected. She still did work for Zenith, but she had built something independent, something that was entirely hers. Sebastian had encouraged every step, watching Rose when Juliet had important pitches, celebrating her victories as enthusiastically as his own. Rose started kindergarten, a bright, curious child who loved books and building blocks in equal measure. She had Sebastian's determination and Juliet's creativity, and watching her grow was the greatest adventure either of them had ever undertaken. Eleanor's health began to decline in her mid-80s, her arthritis worsening, but she remained fiercely independent and sharp-minded. She still lived in the brownstone's guest suite, still watched Rose after school, still offered unsolicited advice that was usually right. One evening, sitting in the garden after Rose was in bed, Eleanor called Juliet and Sebastian over. She looked tired but content, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild weather. "I want you both to know something," she said. "I'm proud of you, not just for what you've built together, but for how you've built it, with integrity, with love." She looked at Sebastian. "You've been like a grandson to me. Thank you for taking care of my girl." "Eleanor," Sebastian started, his voice thick. "Hush, I'm not done," she smiled. "I've lived a good life, a long one. And these last few years, watching you two, watching Rose grow, it's been the happiest ending I could have asked for. When my time comes, I want you to remember that. I got to see my granddaughter find real love. That's everything." They sat with her in the fading light, holding her hands, grateful for every moment. Eleanor passed away peacefully 2 years later in her sleep, in the home she had come to love. Rose was 7, old enough to understand loss, young enough to need constant reassurance. They mourned together as a family, celebrating Eleanor's life and the wisdom she had shared. At the funeral, Sebastian gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears. He talked about how Eleanor had welcomed him into her family that first night, how she had taught him that family wasn't just blood but choice, how she had shown him what unconditional love looked like. "She told me once that some things are just right," he said, looking at Juliet. "That you don't overthink them, you just know." She was right about that, like she was right about most things. I knew the moment I met Juliet that my life was about to change. Eleanor made sure I didn't mess it up. They scattered Eleanor's ashes in the garden, planted a rose bush in her memory. Rose watered it faithfully, telling her great-grandmother about her day, keeping that connection alive in the way children do. Life continued as it does. Sebastian and Juliet navigated the challenges of raising a child, running businesses, maintaining their relationship. They had arguments about division of labor and parenting styles, and whose turn it was to do the grocery shopping. They had moments of doubt and frustration and exhaustion, but they always came back to each other, always remembered that they were on the same team, building the same life. They had date nights and weekend getaways and quiet mornings drinking coffee while Rose slept in. They held hands and kissed in the kitchen and reminded each other why they had chosen this. When Rose turned 10, she asked about how they had met. They told her the story, sitting together on the couch, taking turns with the details. How Grandma Eleanor's ceiling had collapsed, how Mama had written a letter, how Papa had actually shown up. "That's so romantic," Rose sighed, already predisposed to love stories. "It is," Juliet agreed, smiling at Sebastian. "The most romantic part," Sebastian said, "is that your mom saw a problem and decided to do something about it. She didn't wait for someone else to fix it. She made it happen." "And the most romantic part," Juliet countered, "is that your dad listened. He could have ignored the letter, sent someone else, done the minimum, but he showed up. He cared." Rose looked between them. "You're both the romantic parts." "Smart kid," Sebastian said, pulling her into a hug. That night after Rose was in bed, Sebastian and Juliet sat in their garden. It was early summer, the air warm, the rose bush they had planted for Eleanor in full bloom. They sat close together, Juliet's head on Sebastian's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Juliet asked. "If I hadn't written that letter. If you hadn't come all the time." Yeah, it terrifies me actually, how easily we could have missed each other. But we didn't. No, we didn't." He kissed the top of her head. "Best thing that ever happened to me, you writing that letter. Best thing that ever happened to me was you showing up." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city around them, feeling the solid reality of the life they had built. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, would always be challenges. But it was theirs, earned and chosen and fought for. Inside the house, Rose slept peacefully. Around them, the garden grew. And in the quiet space between one moment and the next, Juliet felt the absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. With this man, in this home, in this life they had created from a simple letter and the courage to show up. It was everything she had never known to dream of. And it was real, solid, lasting. It was love. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Rose grew into a teenager, smart and passionate about architecture like her father and creative like her mother. She talked about designing sustainable buildings, solving housing crises, making a difference. Sebastian and Juliet listened and encouraged, recognizing their own ambitions reflected and refracted in their daughter. Zenith Properties continued to evolve, becoming a model for ethical real estate development. Sebastian spoke at conferences, consulted with other companies, shared what he had learned. But he never forgot what Juliet's letter had taught him, that behind every property were real people, living real lives, deserving dignity and care. Juliet's design studio flourished. She took on projects she believed in, mentored young designers, built a reputation for work that was both beautiful and meaningful. She and Sebastian remained partners in Zenith's branding, but she had carved out her own identity, her own success. They celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a return trip to Italy, just the two of them. Rose stayed with Sebastian's brother, excited for the independence. In Rome, eating gelato and walking cobblestone streets, they talked about the future. "I've been thinking," Sebastian said, "about what's next for the company. Rose is talking about studying architecture. What if we transitioned Zenith into something she could eventually take over if she wanted? Build something that lasts beyond us. A legacy," Juliet said. "A family legacy. Built on the foundation we created, no pressure on her but the option." "I love that," she took his hand. "I love you. I love you too, every day more than the day before." They made love that night in their hotel overlooking the Tiber, and it was both familiar and new, 15 years of learning each other, of growing together. After, lying tangled together, Juliet thought about that first night at Sebastian's house, how nervous and excited she had been. How far they had come since then. "What are you thinking?" Sebastian asked, trailing his fingers up and down her arm. "That I would do it all again, every moment, even the hard parts, even my terrible jokes, even those," he laughed, pulled her closer. "Same, every moment." They returned home to Rose, to their lives, to the daily, beautiful, mundane reality of family. Sebastian taught Rose about building codes and structural integrity. Juliet taught her about color theory and design principles. They watched their daughter grow into someone remarkable, knowing they had given her a foundation of love and purpose. On what would have been Eleanor's 95th birthday, they took Rose to the cemetery. She placed flowers on her great-grandmother's grave and told her about school, about the buildings she wanted to design, about the boy she liked who didn't know she existed yet. "Great-grandma would tell you to write him a letter," Juliet said, smiling. "A letter?" Rose looked skeptical. "Like on paper, it worked for us," Sebastian said, pulling Juliet close. Rose rolled her eyes, but she smiled. "You guys are so weird." "We are," Juliet agreed, "but we're happy." That night the three of them had dinner in the garden, under string lights Sebastian had hung years ago. They talked and laughed and made plans. Rose told them about her dreams, and Sebastian and Juliet listened, recognizing the beginning of her own story, separate from but connected to theirs. Later, after Rose went to bed, Sebastian and Juliet stayed outside. The rose bush they had planted for Eleanor was enormous now, cascading blooms in shades of pink and white. The garden was lush, well-tended, a living testament to years of care. "You remember," Juliet said, "that first night I invited you to dinner. How terrified I was that I had made a huge mistake. I remember thinking I couldn't believe my luck, that someone like you would even give me a chance. Someone like me, real, genuine, brave enough to demand better for yourself and the people you loved." He turned her to face him. "You made me want to be better. You still do." She kissed him, soft and lingering. "We made each other better." They sat together under the stars in the garden of the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created. It was quiet and perfect and ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Somewhere in the city, in buildings Sebastian owned and Juliet had helped rebrand, families were living their lives. Safely, comfortably, with landlords who cared. The ripples of that first letter continued to spread, touching lives they would never know about. But here, in this moment, it was just them. Two people who had found each other because of a collapsed ceiling and a billionaire who had shown up. Two people who had built a love story worth telling. Juliet leaned against Sebastian, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong, and thought about young women who might someday write their own letters, demanding better, hoping for change. She thought about the Sebastian Xaviers of the world who might choose to show up, to listen, to care. She thought about love that started with showing up and stayed because both people chose it, every day, over and over again. "Happy?" Sebastian asked, the question he still asked regularly, needing to know, wanting to be sure. So happy, Juliet answered, the truth she would give him for the rest of their lives. So incredibly happy. And in the garden where they had married, where they had celebrated and mourned and lived, surrounded by roses and starlight and the future they were still building together, that was exactly enough. It was everything. Their story had started with a letter about a broken building. It had become a story about people who showed up for each other, who built something lasting, who chose love and kept choosing it through all the ordinary, extraordinary moments of a life well lived. It was real. It was messy. It was imperfect and beautiful and completely, wonderfully theirs. And it lasted